Odin was not on the continent of Asgard, but as soon as he was defeated, he rushed to Nevada and found King Dwarf. Odin, exuding twilight, threw the eternal spear to the ground, his voice hoarse. I need a more powerful artifact, even stronger than the eternal spear. King Dwarf looked at Odin with a shock, especially when he saw the deep exhaustion and life of the other party's wrinkled face, opened his mouth, and finally fell silent. He also knew that the defeat of Odin caused huge amounts of shock in the entire 9 realms. No one thought that the magnificent Odin would fail or lose to the people on Earth. How long can you live? King Dwarf was silent for a while and asked in a low voice. Odin's body is full of death. Jane has reached the point where he can feel it personally. This young man, who has been in the 9 realms for millions of years, is finally about to come to the end of his life? It seems that the trauma that the Earthling brought to Odin is more serious than everyone thought. At least it can support the birth of the new weapon. Asgard has reached the most glorious peak in my hands, and I will not allow Asgard to weaken in my hands, Odin said hoarsely. To this end, he made a crazy decision. King Dwarf looked at him, was silent for a while, and said in a low voice, if you insist, I will fulfill your wish. Melt the eternal spear, gather more Ulu metal, and create the most powerful weapon. King Dwarf immediately looked behind him, and a large number of dwarf people looked at each other, took a deep breath, and immediately went to activate Nevada's most precious forging furnace. A bound neutron star. King Dwarf picked up the eternal spear, and finally took a deep look at Odin, turned around, and threw the eternal spear into the furnace, watching the eternal spear under the neutron star that had undergone special manufacturing, magic, and divine power, melting little by little. What kind of weapon do you want? Still a gun? King Dwarf asks. Odin closed his eyes wearily. Just follow the weapon model you and I conceived a long time ago. The storm axe. King Dwarf paused, his face serious. The storm axe, even now, this weapon is only an artifact in the conception. It is extremely difficult to forge, but again, if it can be successfully forged as they designed, there is no doubt that this will be the history of the 9 worlds, the strongest artifact ever. It comes with the blessing of the Asgard continent. As long as the forging is successful, there will be almost terrifying powers of the whole system. With Bifrost, you can reach any corner of the universe in no time. If you think about it again, this storm battle axe comes from melting the eternal spear, a top-level attack artifact. Its lethality is simply incalculable. And similarly, there are not many people who are qualified to pick up the storm axe in the entire 9 realms. Odin leaned against the wall and slowly closed his eyes, seeming to be imagining meditation, but in fact, he was only using this method to delay the passage of life as much as possible. He is really dying. He can clearly feel the arrival of death, and the rule of death is restricting his body and tearing his soul. Vaguely, Odin seemed to see a blurry figure in a black robe that was fleeting, like his queen. But Odin clearly knew that the other party was not Frigga at all, but death of one of the 5 great creation gods. The true supreme god, the ultimate life that all living entities must fear. It is said that every existence that comes to the end will meet with death, and the soul will eventually fall into the hands of death. Death is not only a real creation god, but also a ubiquitous cosmic law. She is the ultimate end of extinction originally. Legend, everyone sees death differently. Odin closed his eyes and whispered. King Dwarf shook his body, but pretended not to hear anything, and continued his work. Give me some more time, I can't die now. Odin murmured in a voice that only he could hear, almost pleading. In the corner of the realm of life that he felt straightforwardly, the shadow that was incompatible with life always existed, watching him all the time, and getting closer and closer to him. As time passed, King Dwarf's forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. He knew who the mumbling Odin was talking to. As long as the ancient civilization, there must be records about that person. Dang dang. With the last bombardment, the eternal spear finally melted, and the entire dwarf family tried their best to forge a new weapon, and finally, the weapon that existed in the imaginary was made. And it's stronger and more terrifying than imagined. Just staying in place, there will be extremely terrifying divine power breeding. and even neutron stars are faintly unsupportable. Odin opened his eyes suddenly, his gloomy gaze finally showed a little more figure, struggling to get up, panting slightly, walked over, stretched out his hand, and grabbed it. No, there is still a lack of axe handles. Everyone, look for the axe handles immediately. King Dwarf intends to stop Odin. Odin's voice was calm. Axe handle, I have it, I always have it. As he said, he took out a piece of dry branch-like object. The moment he saw this branch, King Dwarf's face completely changed, with a look of horror. This is the root of the world tree? Have you gone to meet the dragon? The root of the world tree is the most precious part of the whole world tree, containing the rules and power of the world tree. But this most basic area has been gnawed by a terrible dragon. Everyone knows that when the roots of the tree are gnawed away, the entire world tree will collapse, and the end of the 9 realms is about to come. If Ragnarok of Asgard is Surtur, then Ragnarok of the world tree is the dragon named Nidarhog. Odin used the root of the tree with a silent face and directly received it on the storm axe. In an instant, the axe showed terrible power, and the entire dwarf kingdom suddenly trembled, and everyone's color changed. Odin didn't say a word. Holding the storm axe high, huge amounts of rainbow descended, and directly teleported him back to Asgard, back to his world. King Dwarf watched in silence all the time, and finally sighed, "World Tree, why did it become like this?" In Roar's whistle, Odin returned to Asgard. He looked down from space. The whole continent was full of wars. There were countless people wailing. He saw Laufey slaughtering all kinds of giants frantically, corpses everywhere. Laufey, today is your death date. Odin took a deep breath. His figure was aging, but before he knew it, his power was even more terrifying, especially the storm axe in his hand. Every moment there was a terrible surge of divine power far beyond the previous one. Laufey looked up and sneered, "Odin, I thought you would have died in a corner of the universe." With that said, he directly took out the casket of ancient winters, the lost treasure, which strengthened his confidence, immediately opened the box, and the smaller half of Asgard turned into a world of ice and snow on the spot. Odin slashed and fought Laufey. As soon as he touched, Laufey, who was holding the winning ticket, suddenly changed his face, revealing a deep shock. Every time the opponent slashed, he could actually cause terrible wounds on his body. Odin with this strength was unprecedented. "How is this possible? You should be dying." Laufey was furious, holding Casket of Ancient Winters high, and controlling the majestic frost power from time to time to fight against Odin, and the entire Asgard fell into huge amounts of shock. The sky's divine power is surging, and every hit can annihilate the fixed star, and the 2 god kings are fighting with all their strength on the road of Asgard. At this moment, the killing intent in Odin's heart was stronger than before. What made Laufey feel more disturbed was that Odin was obviously more determined to die. Boom! There was another pairing, and the Casket of Ancient Winters was smashed to pieces by the storm axe on the spot. The terrible cold breathed out. Laufey was the first to bear the brunt. His face changed wildly, and all his powers would inevitably be temporarily frozen by the extreme ice cold. "Farewell, Laufey, a million-year-old battle, put a stop today. Wait until death, you and I will meet again." Odin's long white hair was fluttering, and in the cold wind, he tore off his own costume that symbolized the king of the gods, waved the storm axe, frantically drew out all the power of Asgard, and then severely chopped it off. In an instant, the entire galaxy seemed to be divided into 2, and all of them were torn apart by the blow of the storm axe. Numerous stars collapsed on the spot, the souls were wailing, and death was smiling. Laufey, the king of giants, had his face frozen forever, annihilated in this unprecedented blow. Odin completely walked to the end of his life, holding a battle axe, staggering and falling onto the continent of Asgard. All the surviving Asgard people saw this scene and their eyes were red. "Too tired. I have dominated the 9 realms for millions of years, but I have to watch Asgard's decline and destruction." Odin's face was exhausted, and the functions of his body were completely gone with the previous battle. He even had no ability to use the storm axe, but at least, there was one more thing he could do. Untie the seal of the world tree and release his other heir. "Father, Loki walked slowly, looking complicated. Odin slowly closed his eyes. In some ways, you are better suited to be a king than Thor, but it's a pity. It's a pity that I'm not yours. I know it, I'm Laufey's son. Loki screamed loudly with red eyes. No, it's not for this reason. Because there are heirs more terrifying than me who will inherit the throne. Finally, I will give you a suggestion. Escape, it will be too late if you don't escape. After saying this, Odin released his hand, and the storm axe fell feebly, hitting the ground with a bang. Loki looked blank and watched as Odin died, listening to the wailing of the whole world tree, as well as the vague roar of excitement, which came from nowhere. The huge amounts of whirlpool appeared. A slender figure, but full of gloom and silence, walked out of the whirlpool slowly. Odin, I finally won. You can't imprison me forever. As soon as the woman waved her hand, a long sword appeared in her hand. The undead aura emanating from her became more terrifying, making Loki tremble. The final victor, after all, is me, the god of death Hela. Hela raised his hand and threw a sword, which directly nailed Odin's chest. You bastard, what are you doing? Loki's face was grim, even though the woman opposite made him feel terrified, but he still pulled out a dagger. When I got back my things, didn't this old thing tell you anything before he died? Hela glanced at Loki coldly, noticed Loki's blood, startled, but immediately ignored it. Rubbish is not worth her time. From Odin's corpse, a large amount of Odin's power immediately grew and was swallowed by Hela. Hela at this moment is even more terrifying, plus she has the support of the entire Asgard continent. As long as she steps on Asgard, she will never be exhausted. Did Asgard actually become such a ghost? But it doesn't matter. As long as I am here, the highest glory will definitely return, and the entire 9 realms will be in the shadow of the Acer Protoss. Hela combed her long and flowing black hair and showed a drunk smile. Boom. At this time, everything should have settled, this moment when the new king is about to ascend to the throne. Suddenly a portal appeared, huge amounts of S.H.I.E.L.D suddenly appeared, brandishing the twilight sword, raised it up with a hideous expression, and then pierced the continent of Asgard. I, S.H.I.E.L.D, come by the order of the mechanical god and bring to Asgard Ragnarok. S.H.I.E.L.D is here. He wielded the twilight sword symbolizing doomsday and extinction, pierced with a sword, and the power of his whole body surged, blasting through the entire Asgard continent in an instant. The moment he stepped on Asgard, he snarled up to the sky and let out a happy roar. The raging fire burned, making this world that had just turned into a world of ice and snow, and instantly turned into a magma purgatory. The sudden arrival made a full-strength bombardment on the Asgard continent. In an instant, this majestic continent erupted with violent tremors and faintly collapsed. S.H.I.E.L.D. Why are you here? Odin is really a waste, not to mention the courage when he gets old, even his brain is gone, and he doesn't know how to deal with the trouble before he died. Hela was frightened, gritted her teeth, and the terrifying divine power surged around her body, and in an instant, extremely crazy coercion broke out. She left Loki who had been stunned, and Roar rushed towards the flame giant in a whistle. S.H.I.E.L.D cannot be allowed to continue to wreak havoc, otherwise it will be the real Ragnarok. According to ancient prophecies, the destruction of Asgard will be the beginning of the most tragic era. She Hela, but to be the god of the 9 realms, how could this happen? In my heart, the anger and dissatisfaction with Odin reached the extreme. Hela shook his hand and shot dozens of sharp blades one after another. Roar stabbed S.H.I.E.L.D in a whistle, but S.H.I.E.L.D just let out a roar, but vented his anger to the entire Asgard continent. The situation of destruction became even more frantic. He is an immortal level godfather, even Odin failed to kill him back then, let alone Hela. The entire continent of Asgard is collapsing, and Hela clearly feels that her power is fading. It's useless, even the sword of the dead can't kill me. S.H.I.E.L.D sneered again and again, roared loudly, and pierced with the last sword. The whole Asgard continent was split into 2 in an instant, and countless Asgard people drifted into the universe's starry sky in endless wailing. The entire Asgard Protoss is on the verge of extinction. Even death god Hela failed to save the world in the end, and no one expected S.H.I.E.L.D to appear suddenly. Very well, it's the dispute between you and me next. See if I kill you or you kill me. Surtur has a hideous expression, and on the face of the flame, with a strong bloodthirsty touch, he has put everything down and slashed at Hela with a sword. The whole Asgard is gone. Why are you still alive? The existence of the two-level godfathers erupted in a fierce confrontation, both harboring unforgettable hatred for each other, with a kind of extreme hatred and rejection. Every confrontation, the shock of divine power, the impact of countless high-energy particles, a scene of apocalypse. Hela, who has lost the blessing of Asgard mainland, faces Surtur, even with the power of Odin, but she is not able to do well. Faced with the veteran death god, she still lacks too much. The terrible confrontation shook the 9 realms, and many gods were shocked, especially seeing the Asgard continent in the upper layer of the world tree collapsed, and large fragments fell all the way down, shocking all existence. A look of astonishment. Why is Asgard gone? Surtur. He said he came by following the orders of the god of machines. Who is the god of machines? Odin has confirmed that he is dead, and the 9 realms will undergo major changes. The scene of the hegemony that existed millions of years ago will be repeated today, and the other 8 worlds will fall into unprecedented chaos and disorder. Everyone looked horrified and helpless, and a strong sense of fear grew. They watched the battle between Surtur and Hela in awe, and thoughts were surging in their hearts. Everything seems particularly terrible. The fierce confrontation continued. The upper level of the entire world tree was in chaos. The fierce battle between the two-level godfathers destroyed everything. The entire Asgard, even the ruins, was not left. Red eyes. Hiss. A door suddenly opened. Martin held Thor's hair and walked slowly in the vacuum of the universe, in a posture as if he were visiting death god Hela. And there is the power of Odin. Odin really took this step, but it may just be a clear move. Martin looked dumb and looked at this unprecedented battle with interest. Roar. Surtur let out a roar, carrying huge amounts of anger and hatred, and a kind of pleasure mixed in it. Martin broke Thor's neck, held it tightly, and laughed in a low voice. Prince Thor, have you seen it? Asgard is gone. All your people are gone, dead clean and happy. Thor's eyes were cracking, blood and tears were streaming down the corners of his eyes, but Martin's neck was pinched tightly. Do you know how much I gave up before I broke Asgard? Together with I squeezed Thor's hammer, stimulated Odin, and risked his short lifespan. Do you know how hard I worked? Martin let out a deep sneer. If you don't ruin Asgard and don't let the overlord of the 9 realms die, how can I build my own planet? As long as I'm still in the Milky Way, I will be in the shadow of Asgard. You know what a terrible result? My dear prince, watch this scene with your eyes wide open. It was so wonderful to be able to drive Asgard to destruction step by step. Martin forcibly broke Thor's head and forced him to watch this scene. Thor roared like a beast, his eyes red. Accompanied by the terrible thunder, the storm axe, after losing its owner, seemed to have sensed a new qualified person. At the moment, it flew. Thor's eyes lit up and his complexion looked terrifying, and he reached out to catch the axe, but Martin moved faster than him, grabbed the handle of the axe, and hacked Thor's chest with an axe, destroying all his internal organs. This time, there is no Captain America to rescue you. That guy was dug out from the North Pole just a few hours ago. Martin sneered in a low voice, whether Thor understood or not. Next second, Martin chopped off Thor's neck with an axe, and his huge head shot up into the sky, and then destroyed his body. He only drew out a lot of blood, which is considered to be the preservation of the noble prince's DNA. Maybe he can study it later. Some biological weapons such as human clones don't think this is impossible. In the Marvel world, there is no such thing as impossible. At this point, in the entire Asgard, only death god Hela is left, and now that Hela is on the verge of a limit, he has been driven to a dead end step by the almost crazy Surtur. Asgard is annihilated, the gods of the Acer Protoss are dead, and the biggest obstacle in front of me no longer exists. Martin opened his arms and closed his eyes, as if he was welcoming a bright future. The most domineering and huge guy standing in front of him collapsed suddenly. Could anyone stop him? As for the other 8 realms in the melee after the absence of Asgard, and the other Protoss that may return. Sorry, what does this have to do with the Cybertron clan? Fight all. In order to fight for the hegemony of the world tree, if you can't get the result, you will all die. Anyway, I will kill whoever stops me. This is Martin's realization, as long as Asgard is finished. Now, there is one Hela left. Kill it as soon as possible, cut the grass and remove the roots. Martin's eyes flashed a bitter cold light, murderous flashes, and finally decided to make a move on Hela. Assemble the combat power of the two-level godfathers, and be sure to kill Hela here. Martin Roar screamed away. This time, without using the leadership module, he strode over a distance of tens of light years in one step, and slammed Hela with a fierce punch. What are you, mean human being? Hela's complexion was distorted, and the terrifying divine power surging around her body, accompanied by the sword of the necromancer she was holding, cut out one after another, leaving a hideous wound on Surtur. As soon as he sensed Martin's approach, he threw a sharp blade with his hand and pierced Martin's head straight. But Martin didn't even bother to dodge. As if he hadn't seen him, he greeted him head-on, and for an instant, a violent roar was produced, and it was the short sword that Hela threw out. Die, Hela, I planned the destruction of Asgard with one hand. How could I make it so easy for you to live? Speaking of it, you should also thank me. If I hadn't killed Odin in advance, you wouldn't get out of trouble. Martin smiled, but he was extremely brutal when he started. Every blow was aimed at destroying the opponent, hitting the spot. He had this powerful combat power. It turned out to be you. You should kill Odin, but you shouldn't destroy Asgard. Hela roared angrily, her voice was sharp and stern, and her face was already distorted. Without the blessing of the Asgard continent, her divine power declined severely, and even the power of Odin that she had just obtained was strenuous. Surtur slashed over with a sword, smashed Hela into the air, roared and strode forward, and shot one after another. Martin is even more powerful to a frontal collision, extremely strong, wearing a defensive supreme god armor, even without using the leadership module, at the moment has the combat power to suppress Hela. I am the god of death in the world tree, and I will never die. Hela was disheveled, with no charm, like a lunatic. But this is still irreversible. Then I will find a way to destroy the entire world tree and release the magic dragon that gnaws at the roots of the world tree, and bring a more terrifying Ragnarok to the 8 realms. Martin's voice was calm, and he blasted out with a punch, which defeated Hela's supernatural power, and even hit the opponent's chest with a punch, causing huge amounts of depression. Die, Asgard people deserve to die. Surtur was completely mad, and at the moment slashed with a sword, using all his powers. Wow! Hela was bombarded and killed by the Twilight Sword, and the body and soul began to disappear. Even at this time, there was still disbelief in her pupils. She couldn't believe that she had just gotten out of trouble, and had yet to enjoy the glory and majesty of becoming a god king. Before she led Asgard to conquer the world tree, everything disappeared. The god of death also has to face death, which is ironic. Very well, the last tricky remnant is also cleared, and finally I can start my layout. Martin stands in a vacuum, with the endless Asgard ruins at his feet, spreading intermittently for hundreds of light years. Behind him stands Surtur like a loyal guard, with amazing power. Everything can finally be on the right track, and Cybertron's coercive multi-universe pace, after destroying Asgard in one hand, is the real start. The violent changes that erupted in the entire 9 realms have not been able to cause huge waves on the Earth for the time being. This wave will only really affect the Earth after a long time. No one realizes that when Martin, who is not S.H.I.E.L.D, brought his shape-shifting King Kong regiment. What a terrible scene when it is really rampant. Fury didn't know that Norse mythology was over, and was still thinking about how to solve Martin's threat. Martin, as well as the intelligent robots he created, are huge amounts of threats. According to the assessment of professionals, these robots are just like a complete life, with their own personalities and values, and a complete logic of thinking. Fury pointed to the computer screen and said to the blonde woman standing beside him, "So, this is why you called me to Earth in a hurry?" Captain Marvel frowned. To be honest, this man's name has spread throughout the galaxy, and the three empires are terrified of him. This defeated Odin head-on, and rushed into hell to be surrounded by countless demons. The retiring man, looking at the entire universe, not many people are his opponents. Moreover, there is this flame giant. Captain Marvel pointed to a picture, his face even more ugly, S.H.I.E.L.D. The prophecy can bring the existence of Ragnarok to the Acer Protoss. I really don't understand. Why Martin? Let S.H.I.E.L.D., the ancient Mephisto, bow his head and obey. In the picture, S.H.I.E.L.D. is frantically venting the anger of being enslaved on the African continent. The body of flames more than 300 meters high can cause a wide range of droughts just by standing there, and half of Africa has almost been burned by S.H.I.E.L.D. What about you? Fury held the last look. You have the power of Tesseract, so you are different. Captain Marvel smiled bitterly. I do have the power of Tesseract, but I am still level sub-Godfather. There is a huge amount of gap between the real level Godfather. Fury took a deep look at the old friend and fell silent. In fact, there is another way to increase strength sharply, but both of them did not say it tacitly. That is, give Tesseract to Captain Marvel, let Captain Marvel draw a powerful force from it, maybe it can break the limit and step into the level Godfather. Even if he is still not Martin's opponent, he is also the level Godfather, and finally he has a level of combat power. But, as the chief of S.H.I.E.L.D., with an element called Zhengji all over his body, how could it be possible to give his biggest hole card to Captain Marvel? Even if Captain Marvel had a fateful relationship with him decades ago, the two sides have joined forces against the Kree and the Screw. How can this be? In front of Zhengji, friendship is shit, which is originally part of the transaction that can be used. Meow, with a soft cry, the orange cat lying in Captain Marvel's arms couldn't help jumping down, shaking his body, and licking his paws comfortably. Fury took a step back subconsciously, the corners of his eyes shaking. I want to build a strong team, I hope you can join. Fury was silent for a moment, and said solemnly. Who is there? You, Tony, Natasha Romanoff, Steve. I plan to win another batch of mutant. Listening to the series of names, Captain Marvel frowned, a little embarrassed. They are all fighting the five scum, it is difficult for the team to bring. In the face of the man's deterrence and horror shadow, even the level sub-Godfather who broke the star with a punch can't even handle it, let alone these goods. I can only say do my best. Captain Marvel was silent for a long time and whispered. Fury breathed a sigh of relief. Actually, it's not just that. I have had many conversations with Zheng Xian of the Spear Bureau and reached a preliminary cooperation intention. The other party also has powerful fighters, and there are 150,000 super ability people. Coupled with the mutant organization headed by the 8 Immortals, the contradictions in joint forces are already extremely powerful. To be honest, with such a comparison, there is only a mere Pacific Ocean, and the difference in combat power between the spear and the shield is so different that Fury feels jealous of the terrible combat power of the spear game. Not to mention how well the top-notch group can fight, the number of official warriors that are being compiled alone is as high as 150,000. How come there are a group of ruthless characters? This is still being compiled, but all those who have ability are proud, and many wild super ability people are unwilling to deal with the official too much. They are alone, and the number is definitely far more than 150,000. Look at myself again, pulling up a super squad, and recruiting people is hard, the real Nima is not good. Even the helicarrier and the spear game are more advanced than S.H.I.E.L.D., and they are even bigger. Then, you are welcome to join, Carol, and you are also welcome to return to Earth. We desperately need your help, Fury said solemnly. Captain Marvel nodded and said solemnly, Fury, as an old friend for many years, I want to remind you that Tesseract is not that simple. It is not only a level universe artifact, but also a more terrifying core. If one day you lose control everything is over. I won't let this happen. Fury is clear and confident. On the moon, a weird person with a big head and a small body. At the moment, he was looking into the distance silently with his hands behind his back. His sight spanned the distant time and space, and he saw things that ordinary people couldn't see at all. Well, this universe is really interesting, even Odin was killed. Frog 2 was thoughtful and enthusiastically recorded the incident. As a member of the Observer family, it is his duty to record all the major events observed into the Observer family's core system, which is regarded as the preservation of precious historical data in the universe. The Observer family is an extremely ancient race in the multi-universe. Every universe has its own people, and the value of their existence is specifically responsible for recording major events in each universe, but they will never interfere in the process. Regardless of whether the world is reborn or destroyed, they are just like their names, they are only responsible for observing and recording, diligent and diligent. But now, Frog thinks things are getting interesting. Odin is killed, Asgard is destroyed, the whole world tree is going to be messed up, and the war is about to start. Olympus and Heavenly Court are about to return. Without the Acer Protoss, they will no longer have a reason to stay away from the world tree. The entire world tree will be in the shadow of returning to the Protoss. Fanatu diligently recorded. A figure stood beside him. The Black Bat King looked at him quietly, both of whom were residents of the moon. The two definitely knew each other, but they usually ignored each other and did not interfere. Don't ask me what to do. Even if this universe is destroyed, I will only go to other universes silently, without interfering in any process. Frog did not lift his head, but said casually. The Black Bat King silently looked at him. The two confronted each other like this, and the atmosphere was weird. Finally, the Black Bat King still couldn't hold back and left first. Frog turned his head and glanced at him, and shook his head slightly. The Black Bat King couldn't help it, he planned to take revenge on the Kree. But this has nothing to do with him, he is just a recorder. Earth. The violent energy fluctuations began to erupt, and when Loki stepped across the vortex with an icy smile, he had already reached the Earth from the distant interstellar. At the moment the Asgard continent collapsed, he luckily activated Bifrost to teleport away randomly. This was an extremely risky move. Maybe he would be teleported to the fixed star and burned to death in an instant. But he returned after all, full of anger and resentment. Stupid human beings, you are dealing with weapons that are completely uncontrollable. Loki arrogantly looked down at all the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents present. Behind him, the tunnel opened by Tesseract at the moment was slowly closing. In the short period of time, Tesseract lost control and, in the shaking, opened a space-time tunnel and teleported Loki to the Earth. Phil Coulson's face is solemn, and he muttered to the researcher, "Turn off Tesseract, now, immediately." The researcher nodded, sweating profusely. Phil Coulson was looking at the man with a cautious look, quickly integrating a large amount of intelligence in his mind, and whispered, "No matter where you are from, you have invaded the secret base of S.H.I.E.L.D., seriously threatening the safety of the Earth. We will arrest you." Suddenly, Phil Coulson stopped talking, looked at the other party's clothing, and suddenly understood the other party's identity. An Asgard. To treat your gods, you should maintain awe and worship from your heart, instead of daring to stand up straight and talk to me like you are now. Loki smiled and touched the strange scepter on his hand obsessively. After that, he directly stepped over a famous agent. When anyone stepped forward to stop him, he was annihilated by Loki's casual blow. He directly picked up Tesseract. This source of constantly blue brilliance exudes a charming luster, dazzling people. Phil Coulson's face was ugly, and he drew his gun at Loki on the spot, although it was of no use. This is a treasure of the Earth, and your presumptuous behavior now will trigger a whole new war. War? The whole world tree is already preparing for war, don't you know? Martin, the madman, he destroyed Asgard. Without the protection of powerful Asgard, the world tree is finished. Loki's face was savage, and in that face, it was revealed deep hatred and madness. It's all gone. The biological father, adoptive father, elder brother, and a cheap sister, together with the home where he lived for more than 1,000 years, are gone. They are all ruined step by step, and it is Martin, the demon-like man who caused all this. He came with a major mission this time, and it was a pawn sent by a cosmic butcher to test. Loki knew this well, but he was very satisfied. As long as he could give him the strength to avenge him, he would be very satisfied. The ant can also bite the elephant badly and make the other party hurt. That's enough. Whoosh! In an instant, Hawkeye shot an arrow. The explosive arrow made a piercing sound in the air, and went straight to Loki at a super fast speed, but Loki smiled again. This time, the smile was a little cold. Boom! The explosion sounded, drowning Loki. Good job! Phil Coulson's eyes brightened, and he ordered in a very quick tone, "All agents, immediately anesthetize, don't kill him if you don't have to." A large number of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents began to draw their guns and shoot. The gunshots were loud, and a large number of anesthetic bullets hit the center of the explosion. Although this is useless, even if S.H.I.E.L.D. has repeatedly revived the potion strength, he still underestimated the opponent, and underestimated how powerful the body is, the descendants of the giants of Jotunheim clan. Loki didn't even fall off a single hair. "You use these beautiful toys to subdue me?" Loki smiled evilly, his face twisted. He held a bullet with his bare hands and looked at it, then dropped it to the ground, sneered again and again. He is a god. Especially after getting the soul scepter from Thanos, he is a true god. He subconsciously grasped the scepter, showing his obsessive color. The knowledgeable him vaguely guessed the true identity of the scepter, especially the bright stone at the top. If it is really what he speculated, it is the thing in the legend. What a mere level godfather! As long as he can control it perfectly, he will become a level single universe. Go and die. Loki sneered. Natasha Romanoff quickly jumped over, tumbling across the clearing, and finally slid out a long distance on the ground. The two rounded thighs shook, and they kicked fiercely towards Loki's point. Loki's speed will only be faster than her, and too much faster. He grabbed Natasha Romanoff's ankle and threw it to the side. "I will bring war and destruction to the earth," Loki yelled. "You never know what you are facing. You will only revolve around this tiny planet for your whole life. It's just a bunch of waste." Boom! There was a violent noise, and a Captain Marvel braved a wave of golden energy, fiercely descended from the sky, directly penetrated dozens of floors, crashed to the bottom of the base, and accurately blasted Loki into 100 meters underground. "Is this the last god Asgard left behind?" Captain Marvel looked disappointed. "That's it?" "Whoosh! Be careful," Phil Coulson yelled. Loki has already rushed up with the scepter, and stabs Captain Marvel in the chest with a vicious blow, with blood flowing from the corner of his mouth, and grinning. "Become my loyal servant, stupid human." Captain Marvel looked at him coldly. Loki's sneer stopped abruptly, revealing a deep daze, and then stabbed carefully, and found that he couldn't get in at all. It was too hard. Next second, Captain Marvel slapped him directly, and Loki had no room for resistance in the face of this star-smashing force, but Captain Marvel's fist went straight through Loki. "This is a virtual image." The other Loki pierced Hawkeye's chest directly, and then laughed, using a bewilderment and deceit magic, and disappeared in the same place in an instant, together with the tesseract on the ground, disappeared in an instant. Everyone's faces were blue. Captain Marvel closed his eyes and felt for a while. His face was ugly and said, "I can't sense tesseract. What is the scepter in his hand? It can actually interfere with the energy frequency of tesseract for a short time." "War is coming." Phil Coulson gritted his teeth, touched his waist, dialed a number directly, and only said a word. The Avengers project is launched. In an instant, a large amount of information was passed out, summoning the selected members to gather together. A few hours later, in a secret base of S.H.I.E.L.D., Captain America Steve has a solemn expression. "I am happy to contribute my strength. I am willing to do things that are beneficial to the world." Many super ability people and tech tycoons accepted the invitation and came to a magnificent helicarrier with various thoughts. This is a big guy, and he also upgraded a lot of weapons, including energy weapons researched from Tesseract. Tony Stark wore a battle armor and flew directly to the helicarrier resting on the sea. There were also some people standing around, but looking at these bells and whistles, Tony showed a look of distrust on his face. "Hey, this isn't Captain Stars and Stripes. My dad told me about you, saying that you are a very serious guy with no fun after 70 years of sleep. It feels good, right? This beautiful blonde lady, meet for the first time." Tony opened his mouth and opened the steel battlesuit slowly. Tony was wearing an extremely expensive suit, watching these teammates critically. When I saw Captain Marvel, he immediately became serious and walked over with a solemn expression, intending to soak the blonde woman. At this time, Steve, who is in charge of conscience, stood up and said solemnly, "We who stepped on the battlefield together will all be comrades in arms. I hope we can get along." Fury looked at these people indifferently with his hands behind his back. These were the fighters he could find right now, but no matter how he looked at them, he seemed lacking in confidence. Facing the terrifying enemy of level Godfather, it was impossible to match. Tony is also using his own way to test the personalities of several people, including agents such as Natasha Romanoff. He squeezed them with a vicious tongue, and silently scored these guys in his heart. They are a team and are going to fight their lives together, and no one wants to be desperate on the front line when a bunch of unchained waste suddenly appear behind them. After all, the opponent they faced was aliens. Finally here? The stage of a group of beam-jumping jokers is also a rare excitement. Martin sits on a chair, with a large number of mobile screens in front of him. Every moment there are countless images flashing, all of which are received and remembered by Martin. He saw Loki standing at the top of the Stark building, quietly overlooking the city. After looking at it for a while, Martin laughed. The clever descendants of giants of Jotunheim are worthy of Lof's son. Martin rose slowly. To be honest, the ghosts like Chitaru are a bunch of garbage that is not worth wasting time. These famous thieves in the whole universe are on the right track after being enslaved by Thanos, but the specific combat effectiveness is also just like that. The drawbacks are too great. From the beginning, Martin didn't pay attention to Zitari. The Obsidian 5 generals who started with each level sub-godfather deserve more attention. Especially, the superior Thanos. Only Thanos is worthy of attention, everything else is rubbish, but if I hold infinite gems in my hand, the Thanos of level sub-godfather will be half of it. Martin held his hands behind his back, his eyes cold. Many well-known, normal Thanos is just a little rubbish, only level sub-godfather, nothing more. The most powerful place in Thanos is never originally he, but the horror ability that he can perfectly use all weapons. Whether it's infinite gems, the heart of the universe, or the reality controller, these three things give Thanos the strength of the three levels of multi-level universe, almighty universe level, and conceptual limits. This is terrible. Throughout the entire Marvel system, Thanos is the most special guy. To a certain extent, it really is like the movie version said, he is destined. However, if someone with destiny can't break it, the Thanos trash of level sub-godfather can easily be choked to death, as long as he doesn't give him time to develop. Martin looked cold and directly summoned all the soldiers. Another war has begun. This time, aliens are coming to invade the Earth. Those who are interested can join the war. It can also be regarded as a real close encounter with the interstellar civilization of this universe. It's only a matter of time before many of the many interstellar civilizations start war. If they want them to spit out what they ate, they can only use slaughter and blood to pave the way. Martin stood with his hands behind his back in the center of the huge circular conference hall. In all directions, there were people who were standing up one after another. They all looked down and stared at Martin, who was like the center of the world. To be honest, this conference hall is really big and unreasonable. Even every seat is specially prepared for the shape-shifting kings who are a few meters high. It is so big that it makes Dr. Banner and humans at a loss what to do. Then, this time my Decepticon Legion will participate. Megatron stood up with a grim expression. Optimus Prime was silent for a moment, and said solemnly, "Since the war is a matter of time, then, in order to reduce the soldiers' losses in the more tragic war in the future, I will also lead the Autobots to participate." Megatron snorted coldly and looked disdainful. "Whether to participate, it's up to you. Anyway, there are few opponents who can fight. It stands to reason that this is just a trial for the opponent. Look at the reactions of the World Tree and the reactions of Ancient One and me. Then we will decide the next move." Martin's voice was indifferent. He will also participate in the war this time, not for the boring slaughter of the weak. Chitauri really has no value worthy of his conquest, he is more concerned about another thing. The Thanos of this universe. Did they collect infinite gems out of great ideals? or did they collect infinite gems out of the dream of licking dogs? This is a very important thing. If it's like the movie version of the Family Planning Commissioner Thanos, everything is fine, just think of a way to kill Thanos, but if it's the comic version of Thanos, it's a bit tricky. The comic version of Thanos, who has been fooled by death since childhood, is the loyal #1 licking dog. Even if the collection of infinite gems destroys half of the universe, it is also for the stupid purpose of making death happy. If it's the latter, killing Thanos will surely shock death. Even if the death of this universe must be a duplication of complete death, that's an extremely tricky thing. Martin looked thoughtful. His plan is to break away from the Earth, build the planet Cybertron, and at the expense of all the resources of this universe, to support the explosive development of Cybertron, and then formally enter the vast and endless multi-universe, with many ancient gods and terrible race clashes. What a shocking miracle road this is. Martin felt so too. Then act. Martin dropped these words, and his body slowly disappeared in place. In an instant, the entire huge base began to agitate. A large number of shapeshifting diamonds began to swarm into action. Many of the shapeshifting diamonds who were originally turning into vehicle forms and lying corpses suddenly began collective shapeshifting, and countless war weapons changed into combat modes, took out their weapons one after another, looking hideous. The atmosphere of silence spread wildly, waiting for the landing bridge to be opened to transport them to the battlefield of the New York War. Among the many shapeshifting diamonds, there are many more powerful guys. Although they are not up to the 3rd level, there is no doubt that they only need to observe their body, energy intensity, and various body system indexes to understand. They are far beyond the shapeshifting King Kong activated by Earth machinery. That's right. These new shapeshifting diamonds are the orthodox shapeshifting diamonds that are finally cultivated from the incubation warehouse through the complex process of shaping, correcting, awakening, and shaping the CNA gene sequence. And there are vibranium elements in the body. Such orthodox shapeshifting diamonds are much stronger than ordinary shapeshifting diamonds at first. Open black lens bracket shapeshifting King Kong warrior close black lens bracket open black lens bracket Decepticons, Autobot Corps, soldiers, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket character, plus, close black lens bracket, height, 6 meters. Open black lens bracket energy, 1.2 million close black lens bracket open black lens bracket body, healthy close black lens bracket open black lens bracket strength, Level 2 close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket saying, close black lens bracket, evaluation. Shapeshifting King Kong, born through the orthodox model of reproduction, is the most important foundation member of the entire shapeshifting King Kong family. According to Awakening's different CNA sequences, they are good at different fields. Close black lens bracket. This is the bottom level shapeshifting diamond data. If you consider that every shapeshifting diamond possesses mimic ability, transform its own partial duplication body ability, powerful computing power and database, and a mechanical body far beyond the flesh and blood, there is no doubt that every orthodox shapeshifting King Kong is equivalent to a superhero of the Earth, and it is the kind that is not weak. This is the natural advantage of shapeshifting King Kong, equal to a national fighter. There are also those little things that only have the tape legion, which are the bottom of the real combat power. Martin thought for a while and shook his head. Seriously, he still lacks an excellent intelligence officer. Whether it is a tape recorder or a sound wave, as long as one can come, it will save him a lot of trouble. A large number of troops are ready to go, just waiting to set foot on the battlefield and start killing. New York. Loki stood on the top of the Stark building with a cold face, holding Tesseract with his left hand, and the scepter with his right hand. The two terrifying forces collided with each other and disappeared instantly. In an instant, there seemed to be countless rays of light shining, like stars shattered and formed. The power of the two-level universes, it's a pity that they don't belong to me for the time being. Loki looked down, with deep regret in his eyes. This is a good thing, but it doesn't belong to him. But he will work hard to get one. As long as there is one and it is perfectly controlled, he will have the mighty power to sweep the world tree. 1,000 meters high in the sky, the squally roar roared. I never mind being a running dog for a big shot, as long as he can withstand the price of my betrayal. Loki put Tesseract on a complicated space instrument. The blue light burst out like the sun driven by the instrument. A beam of light rushed straight into the sky. The blue covered the sky, and under the shocking gaze of countless people, opened the door to another world. What is that? The new energy of the Stark group. Who is that ugly guy? A large number of people looked out to observe. Some of them simply took out their binoculars and looked at the unprecedented scene in amazement. The blue vortex covered the sky, and the next moment, under the dumbfounded gaze of the New Yorkers, a faintly terrifying shadow was shuttled over. You alien, what are you doing? Tony raised his hand and blasted an energy cannon towards the instrument, but it was of no use. Tesseract's own energy position was not the strength of Tony's armor. Tony's face was ugly, and he debugged a greater energy power bombardment, but it still had no effect. Useless, stupid mortals, this is the power of the gods. Kneel down quietly and accept God's doomsday judgment on you despicable mortals. Loki smiled with a twisted face, picked up the soul scepter and pointed to it. With a loud noise, Tony's whole body was blown out, leaving a large amount of damage to the armor on his chest, which was shocking. At this time, the blue vortex tunnel completely solidified. In the next instant, a large number of weird flight devices rushed out of it, densely packed, super fast and friction with the air, making a harsh sound, like a beehive, madly gushing out thousands of poisonous bees. The Chitauri army, here comes. This is just the beginning. A large number of abnormal floating beasts roared like whales, and they crossed the tunnel of time and space to reach the earth. Their huge bodies smashed into a rampage, and a large number of Zeta Swiss soldiers rushed out of the body. Alien, alien, prepare for war. Everyone takes up arms. Where's the army? Where is the army? Roar. Since then, at the moment, several black stone monuments that are too big to be slammed down at the moment. Every stone that hits the New York City area can trigger a terrifying wave like a small planet falling. The ground is disgusted and tall buildings was broken. These obelisks alone destroyed most of New York City, and countless civilians died tragically in the wave that was set off. This is just the beginning. On the obelisk, the gates opened, releasing the beast imprisoned inside, a four-handed black-skinned monster that looked like a wolf, screaming piercingly, rushing out of the stone frantically like a tide, and flooding the mountains and plains. Even Thanos' biological weapon, the Vanguard, has arrived. Monster. There are monsters. Help. Where's superhero? Where's the military? Who will save me? Pioneer guards, biological weapons, also rely on numbers to win. Other than that, there is really nothing commendable. As for being obedient and not afraid of death, they are the minimum requirements for all biological weapons. Compared with the demon-like army in Darkseid next door, it is indeed inferior, but in the eyes of the people of at the moment, these vanguards are already extremely terrifying creatures. A large number of vanguard guards overwhelmed the sky, rushed out frantically from the slabs, and killed people at sight, turning the entire New York City into a living sheer hell. The scene is extremely bloody, and in addition to the bombardment of a large number of Cheetar fighters' energy weapons in the sky, a large number of civilians are being slaughtered at all times. This is the war, the real war. As long as the war starts, it will do everything. The Avengers assembled quickly, but apart from Captain Marvel and Iron Man, who were quite strong, the others' combat power was really poor. The most powerful Captain America was still smashing with shields. Roar. Captain Marvel ran wild on the battlefield and easily destroyed all the obelisks. Even the floating giants could easily be destroyed, but from the time and space vortex, soon more obelisks and troops poured into the earth. Boom. An amazing psychokinesis swept the audience, and a large number of Chitauri died. Hey, I thought you were already dead in the meteorite landing, Tony shouted immediately. Logan looked up at the sky, threw the cigar to the ground fiercely, and said coldly, "You should take care of yourself first, and be careful of being killed." After speaking, he glanced at Chin with affection, and his eyes instantly made Cyclops, who was still in a heavy mood, feel completely sick. Professor X looked serious and said in a deep voice, Jin, you and Aurora block the entrance of the whirlpool, and don't let more enemies come in. Logan, you find a way to shut down the device with the Avengers. Kurt, you stay by my side. Professor, why don't you use psychic power to control these guys? I tried. These guys are half-life and half-machine hybrid creatures, and they can't be controlled completely. Professor X's face was solemn, and he looked up at the enemy that rushed into the earth like a tsunami. In the depths of his eyes, in addition to shock, there was also a strong jealousy. His broken legs seemed to be tingling at this moment. His legs were abolished when he joined forces with Magneto to fight an alien many years ago. He will never forget this experience. X-Men joined the war, especially Jin and Aurora, who can control the weather and create a wide range of thunderstorms, cleared the field in a nearly violent manner, and a large number of enemies died, successfully stabilizing the situation. A large number of surviving citizens made a roar of joy and looked at X-Men. There was no longer the rejection and disgust of the past, but they were full of gratitude and tears flowed down. Only those who get help in the most crisis can understand this feeling better. Professor X felt the countless gratitude and guilty will, and smiled at the corner of his mouth, with a look of relief on his face. Huh, these idiots, don't run away, what are you waiting for? Logan was very uncomfortable with the occasion of being surrounded by gratitude and worship. He looked unnatural and grunted. He climbed up a tall building and smashed a floating behemoth with a few paws. Professor X smiled and watched this scene. He also perceived that many folk heroes, such as Daredevil, also appeared, attacking the single soldiers in the broken streets and alleys, and even some super criminals were very rage, and began to organize themselves. The team of the team joins forces with the heroes. Although they are swearing at each other, they are teaming up anyway. Although many of them are not of the Superman category, their fighting ability has reached the top of humanity, and dealing with ordinary soldiers is not a problem. This is exactly what Professor X is chasing hard for. No one can understand the emotion in his heart at this moment, this kind of racial division that no longer entangles ordinary people and mutant too much, and fights together for a common goal. This is his lifelong pursuit. This crisis has indeed resulted in heavy losses. New York lost at least 2/3 of its population, but in the long run, it may be a good thing for the entire planet. Professor X was silent for a while, protected by Cyclops beside him, from time to time blasted and killed a large number of soldiers rushing over. For a time, the scene seemed to be barely deadlocked. Jin and Aurora tried their best to block the space-time tunnel, but the tunnel is too large and has a tendency to expand. At the moment has covered 1% of the tunnel. New York is still expanding. More Chitauri rushed in, screamed harshly, and bombarded indiscriminately with more powerful energy weapons. Hiss. A faint voice sounded, huge amounts of colorful vortex appeared on the streets of New York, heavy but neat heavy voice came. A large number of war weapons joined the battlefield at this time. Their heavy bodies stepped on the ground every step, can make the ground produce small areas of fragmentation, but no one cares about these anymore. Yuan constantly war machine arrived at the battlefield in New York via the land bridge, and began to set up its own powerful weapons under the leadership of each squad leader, and began to bombard and kill a large number of enemies in the Roar's whistle. The shape-shifting King Kong army arrived.